The pencil trembled in Major Rashid al-Tikridi's fingers as he sketched defensive positions in his field notebook, the paper damp with sweat from the March heat of southern Iraq. Concrete dust hung in the air like talcum powder, mixing the acrid smell of diesel generators with the metallic tang of rebar and mortar that defined every Republican Guard bunker complex. Before you continue watching, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your location right now. And if you're finding this story as incredible as I am, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold military history. This was the moment when 21st century warfare collided with 20th century military thinking, forever changing how wars would be fought. March 20th, 2003, 4:30 a.m. local time. Along the Kuwait-Iraq border, coalition air planners loaded target coordinates into cockpit systems with the casual precision of entering a street address into a GPS device. The numbers represented bunkers, tank revetments, and command posts that Iraqi officers like Major al-Tikridi believed were invisible sanctuaries, protected by distance, darkness, and deception. The Iraqis had prepared for a different kind of war. Soviet-style field manuals emphasized fixed defensive positions behind thick concrete barriers and bermed earthworks. Tank crews dug their T-72s and T-55s into carefully prepared revetments, metal hulls swathed in additional armor plating, their long gun barrels protruding through gaps in mud embankments, like steel fingers pointing toward an enemy they expected to meet at close range. In garrison towns across central Iraq, Republican Guard commanders dismissed American precision weapons as gadgets, a cultural shorthand for foreign technology they assumed could be outfoxed through cunning and traditional military skill. These were experienced officers who had survived 8 years of war with Iran, who had watched their forces resist coalition bombing in 1991. They understood firepower, but they understood it in terms of carpet bombing, artillery barrages, and massed tank assaults. What they didn't understand was that war itself had fundamentally changed. At Talil Air Base, south of Nasiriyah, Lieutenant Colonel Mahmoud Hassan inspected his hardened aircraft shelters with satisfaction. Each reinforced concrete structure could withstand direct hits from conventional bombs, their thick roofs and blast doors designed to protect Iraq's remaining fighter aircraft. The base's defensive positions followed textbook doctrine: interlocking fields of fire, camouflaged gun positions, and communication trenches connecting bunkers that had taken months to construct. Hassan had laughed when intelligence briefings mentioned American smart bombs that could allegedly find individual buildings from miles in the sky. Such precision seemed impossible to minds shaped by decades of area-effect weapons and massed bombardments. The night air carried sounds that should have been warnings. The distant, deep drone of high-altitude aircraft, barely audible above the hum of diesel generators, and the occasional bark of guard dogs. Iraqi radar operators tracked aircraft formations at altitudes that seemed too high for effective bombing, 8 to 12 miles above the earth, far beyond the reach of surface-to-air missiles or anti-aircraft artillery. But those aircraft weren't coming down to attack level. In the pre-dawn darkness of March 21st, the first Joint Direct Attack Munitions, JDAMs, began their autonomous descent toward coordinates locked into their guidance systems hours earlier. These weren't the falling bombs of previous wars, requiring pilots to fly directly over targets while facing intense ground fire. These were thinking weapons, each one carrying a global positioning system receiver that continuously compared its location to its intended destination, making thousands of tiny adjustments during its fall. The psychological revolution wasn't just technological, it was conceptual. Major al-Tikridi had positioned his command post in what he considered an impregnable location, a reinforced bunker complex hidden beneath date palm groves, its concrete walls 3 feet thick, its entrance concealed by earthworks and camouflage netting. The facility had survived coalition reconnaissance flights for weeks, its thermal signature masked by surrounding vegetation and careful emissions control. At 04:45 hours, a single 2,000-pound JDAM, released from an altitude of 30,000 feet, struck the bunker's roof with surgical precision. The explosion didn't announce itself with a whistling descent of conventional bombs. There was no warning siren, no time for personnel to take cover. The first indication of attack was the building's sudden disintegration, walls collapsing inward, the roof pancaking into the command center, concrete dust erupting like a volcanic cloud that coated everything within 100 meters in fine gray silt. Survivors described the aftermath in terms that revealed their shock. The air felt like flour, thick and choking. The metallic, burning plastic smell mixed with diesel fumes, and something worse, the acrid signature of modern warfare's precision. Where moments before had stood a structure designed to withstand conventional attack, only twisted rebar and pulverized concrete remained. But this was just the beginning. What truly shattered Iraqi military confidence wasn't the destruction of a single bunker, but the systematic elimination of targets that commanders had believed were untouchable. Tank revetments that had taken weeks to construct disappeared under single strikes. Aircraft shelters that had protected valuable assets for years became concrete coffins in seconds. The mathematical precision was terrifying. A young Iraqi lieutenant later wrote in his memoir, "Before the first strikes, we laughed at the idea that a bomb could find a single building from the sky. By late March, none of us were laughing. We were silent." The silence spoke volumes about a psychological transformation that would reshape modern warfare. Iraqi officers who had dismissed American gadgets were about to discover that precision had become more devastating than any amount of conventional firepower. And this was only day one of their education in 21st century combat. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Al-Taji military complex as Colonel Farid Khalil pressed his binoculars against burning eyes, watching smoke columns rise from positions that had been fully operational 12 hours earlier. The acrid smell of burning rubber and melted plastic hung in the still air, mixing with the sulfurous stench of high explosives and something else, the greasy metallic odor that now marked every precision strike site. This wasn't random destruction. It was surgical dismantling of Iraq's military infrastructure, one GPS coordinate at a time. Khalil's hands shook as he lowered the binoculars, not from fear, but from the cognitive dissonance of witnessing the impossible. His engineering background told him that bombs simply couldn't find individual buildings from altitudes beyond visual range. Yet the evidence surrounded him. Headquarters bunkers reduced to geometric piles of rubble, ammunition depots cratered with mathematical precision, tank positions eliminated, with single strikes that left neighboring structures untouched. The morning briefing revealed the scope of the catastrophe. During the pre-dawn hours of March 21st, coalition aircraft had destroyed 47 hardened targets across 3 provinces using exactly 47 bombs. Not 48 bombs for 47 targets, not 100 bombs carpet bombing the general area. 47 targets, 47 direct hits, 47 piles of precise devastation. The mathematics were terrifying in their efficiency. At the Republican Guard's 3rd Corps headquarters near Baghdad, General Qusay Mahmoud studied damage reports that read like a textbook on precision warfare. The Americans had struck communication nodes, supply depots, and command bunkers with what appeared to be omniscient targeting intelligence. Facilities that had been constructed in secret, camouflaged with elaborate deception measures, protected by multiple defensive layers, all eliminated with surgical strikes that suggested complete tactical awareness. "They know where everything is," whispered his operations officer, Major Ali Hassan, as he spread reconnaissance photographs across the conference table. Each image showed the same pattern: circular craters centered on vital installations, collateral damage minimized to a few meters radius, precision that bordered on the supernatural. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. Radio intercepts suggested that American pilots were selecting targets from preloaded coordinate lists, not conducting real-time reconnaissance. The implications chilled professional soldiers who understood logistics. The Americans had cataloged Iraq's entire military infrastructure, assigned GPS coordinates to each installation, and were systematically destroying them according to a predetermined plan. This wasn't warfare. It was inventory management. At the Medina Division's forward command post south of Baghdad, Lieutenant Colonel Omar al-Dulaimi faced a crisis that transcended military tactics. His carefully prepared defensive positions, interlocking bunkers connected by communication trenches, tank revetments, positioned for mutual support, artillery emplacements sited according to Soviet doctrine, were being eliminated faster than they could be replaced. The division's war diary, discovered months later by coalition forces, recorded the psychological progression. Day 1. Enemy precision strikes on selected targets. Damage assessment ongoing. Day 2. Systematic destruction of hardened positions. Pattern suggests comprehensive intelligence preparation. Day 3. Defensive doctrine appears obsolete against standoff precision weapons. Obsolete, the word that haunted every Iraqi commander. A conscript's diary entry, later published in a Baghdad memoir, captured the surreal nature of precision warfare. I woke to the sky falling in 3 seconds. Our bunker, which had protected us for months, became our tomb in the time it takes to draw a breath. The walls didn't crack or crumble. They simply disappeared, turned to dust that filled our lungs and coated our skin like flour. The sensory details repeated across every strike site. Fine gray dust that turned the air thick and choking. The metallic tang that coated everything. The eerie silence that followed each detonation. Survivors described walking through aftermath zones as moving through pocket dimensions where normal physics seemed suspended. Buildings reduced to geometric piles. Vehicles compressed into twisted sculpture. Concrete barriers powdered into substances resembling talcum. Precision had its own signature. Yet, Iraqi forces continued their attempts at adaptation. At the Al-Qadisiyah barracks, engineers worked frantically to disperse equipment and personnel, moving critical assets every 6 hours to prevent targeting. They constructed dummy installations, deployed electronic countermeasures, and implemented strict communications security protocols designed to mask unit locations and movements. None of it mattered. The Americans possessed something beyond superior technology. They had achieved information dominance so complete that Iraqi deception efforts only delayed the inevitable by hours or minutes. GPS-guided weapons didn't require real-time target designation. They operated from coordinate databases compiled through satellite reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and human sources that had been mapping Iraq's military infrastructure for months or years. By March 23rd, the psychological transformation was complete among frontline units. Officers who had begun the war confident in their defensive preparations now spent their time calculating survival probabilities rather than tactical advantages. Soldiers who had trusted in concrete and steel barriers found themselves measuring distances to the nearest escape routes, knowing that no position offered genuine protection against weapons that could find individual buildings from the stratosphere. The diary of an Iraqi tank commander, captured near An-Nasiriyah, revealed the evolution of military thinking in real time. Day 1. We are prepared for their attack. Day 2. Their weapons are more accurate than we expected. Day 3. There is nowhere to hide from gadgets that see through darkness and distance. Gadgets. The dismissive term had become obsolete. What Iraqi officers were witnessing wasn't just technological superiority. It was the emergence of a new form of warfare, where information and precision had replaced mass and destruction as the decisive factors. The Americans could eliminate any target they could locate, and they appeared capable of locating everything that mattered. But the true scope of this technological revolution was still revealing itself. target by target, strike by strike, as Iraq's military leadership discovered that the war they had prepared to fight no longer existed. The transformation had only begun. The radio crackled with static as Major General Rad al-Hamdani adjusted the frequency, desperate for contact with his scattered Republican Guard divisions across the approaches to Baghdad. The smell of burning diesel fuel drifted through the command bunker's ventilation system, mixed with the chalky residue of pulverized concrete that had become the olfactory signature of modern warfare. This was the moment when Iraq's military leadership realized they were fighting not just a technologically superior enemy, but an entirely different kind of war. By March 25th, coalition air planners had achieved something unprecedented in military history: the systematic neutralization of an entire nation's defensive infrastructure through precision strikes that averaged less than one bomb per target. Iraqi commanders studying battle damage assessments discovered patterns that defied their understanding of aerial warfare. Ammunition depot complexes measuring over 0.8 of a square kilometer. Massive facilities containing more than 50 concrete structures filled with decades of accumulated munitions had been rendered inoperative by a handful of precisely placed strikes. The mathematics were inexorable and terrifying. At the Al-Taji complex north of Baghdad, engineering teams attempting damage assessment found themselves documenting destruction that bordered on the surgical. Building after building showed identical damage patterns: circular penetration holes through reinforced roofs, catastrophic overpressure that had collapsed internal structures, and debris fields that spread in perfect radial patterns from impact points. The precision wasn't accidental. It was engineered. Captured battlefield notes later revealed how Iraqi officers attempted to comprehend what they were witnessing. Colonel Mahmoud al-Takrit had saved target coordinate maps recovered from crashed coalition aircraft, studying them like archaeological artifacts that might reveal the thinking behind seemingly supernatural accuracy. His annotations, discovered months later, showed a professional soldier's grudging recognition that gadget strikes were the result of systematic planning, not technological magic. The revelation was worse than supernatural intervention. It was perfect preparation. In the ancient city of Babylon, where Saddam Hussein had constructed a modernist palace overlooking archaeological ruins, Republican Guard communications officers monitored coalition radio traffic through sophisticated intercept equipment. What they heard shattered their last illusions about technological parity. American pilots discussed target coordinates with the casual precision of taxi dispatchers, reading GPS numbers that corresponded to Iraqi installations these officers believed were secret. Grid: November, Delta, 7, 7, 4, 5, 8, 2. Ammunition, storage, hardened structure. Expect secondary explosions. The clinical language of systematic destruction, delivered in voices that betrayed neither emotion nor uncertainty. These weren't warriors engaged in desperate combat. They were technicians performing inventory management from 30,000 feet. But the psychological impact extended beyond military targets. In Baghdad's Karata district, civilians had adapted to intermittent electricity by clustering around battery-powered radios, listening to news broadcasts that tried to explain the impossible sounds echoing across the city. The deep drone of high-altitude aircraft had become constant background noise, punctuated by sudden concussive waves that shattered windows kilometers from impact sites. Children learned to distinguish between the long bass rumble of approaching bombers and the sharp crack of detonation, followed by the persistent ringing that marked another precisely eliminated target. The sound profile of precision warfare had its own terrible rhythm. Lieutenant Ali Hassan, whose tank platoon had been positioned in carefully prepared revetments south of Baghdad, witnessed the systematic elimination of armored vehicles that represented Iraq's best defensive technology. T-72 tanks that had survived years of warfare with Iran became twisted metal sculptures in seconds. their additional armor plating and defensive modifications rendered meaningless by weapons that struck from angles no ground-based defense could address. Hassan's diary, recovered after his capture, described the sensory aftermath of precision strikes with the detail of someone trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. The struck tank smelled of hot, flaky paint mixed with sulfur and melted plastic. The road wheels were warped into impossible shapes, the turret blown clean off the hull. Everything metal had become hot to the touch, as if the bomb had somehow heated the entire vehicle from within. This wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Coalition targeting had achieved something beyond tactical effectiveness. It had demonstrated information dominance so complete that Iraqi defensive measures became counterproductive. Camouflage nets that had traditionally provided concealment were now targeting aids, helping coalition planners identify which installations Iraqi forces considered most valuable. Electronic countermeasures designed to jam guidance systems proved useless against weapons that locked onto GPS coordinates during manufacturing, not during flight. Every defensive innovation revealed Iraqi thinking to an enemy that seemed to possess comprehensive surveillance. At the military college in Baghdad, professors who had taught artillery and armored tactics for decades found their curricula suddenly obsolete. Defensive positions that had been textbook examples of proper military engineering became case studies in vulnerability. The concrete bunkers, interlocking fields of fire, and mutually supporting strongpoints that defined Soviet-influenced doctrine offered no protection against weapons that could strike from directly overhead with precision measured in meters rather than kilometers. A British engineer who later participated in clearance operations described entering struck bunkers as standing in pockets of cold dust where the air felt like flour and every surface was coated in fine gray silt. The quote, physical transformation of concrete and steel into powder and fragments represented something more profound than explosive force. It was the material evidence of conceptual obsolescence. Traditional fortification had become meaningless, yet the most devastating realization wasn't technological, but strategic. Iraqi intelligence officers, analyzing coalition strike patterns, discovered that American air planners possessed detailed knowledge of Iraqi military infrastructure that extended back years, possibly decades. The precision wasn't the result of real-time reconnaissance, but of comprehensive preparation that had cataloged every significant military installation, assigned GPS coordinates to each target, and prioritized their destruction according to strategic importance. The war had been planned and partially fought before the first bomb fell. What would you do when faced with an enemy that knew your defensive positions better than you did, that could eliminate any target it chose to engage, and that demonstrated technological superiority so complete that your most advanced weapons seemed primitive by comparison? Iraqi commanders faced exactly this situation, and their responses revealed the psychological trajectory from confidence through confusion to resignation. The transformation had become inevitable. As March drew to a close, the mathematics of defeat became undeniable. Coalition forces had neutralized Iraq's air defense network, eliminated its command structure, and systematically destroyed its ability to conduct coordinated defensive operations. All of this had been accomplished primarily through precision strikes that averaged less than 5 minutes from target acquisition to destruction. The speed of modern warfare had compressed the traditional cycle of military decision-making into intervals too brief for effective response. The afternoon heat shimmered off the concrete runway at Baghdad International Airport as Colonel Ahmed al-Rashid walked among the twisted remains of Iraqi fighter aircraft. Their aluminum hulls melted into abstract sculptures by precision strikes that had found each target with mathematical certainty. The metallic tang in his mouth had become constant now, a mixture of dust, fuel residue, and the chemical signature of modern explosives that marked every breath in occupied Iraq. This was the moment when the last believers in traditional warfare confronted the reality of their obsolescence. By April 10, 2003, the transformation was complete, not just militarily, but psychologically. Iraqi officers who had begun the war dismissing American gadgets found themselves studying coalition tactics with the intensity of graduate students trying to comprehend a form of warfare that had rendered their professional training meaningless. The speed of their defeat, barely 3 weeks from invasion to the fall of Baghdad, had compressed decades of military evolution into a crash course in 21st century combat. Colonel al-Rashid's personal notebook, discovered years later during research interviews, revealed the intellectual journey of a professional soldier confronting paradigm shift in real time. His early entries from March had dismissed GPS-guided weapons as expensive gadgets that couldn't match the proven effectiveness of massed artillery and armored assaults. His final entries read like technical manuals, filled with precise calculations of circular error probabilities, standoff distances, and targeting methodologies. The student had become the pupil. At the former Republican Guard Academy in Tikrit, American intelligence officers found libraries filled with Soviet-era military manuals that had guided Iraqi tactical thinking for decades. The contrast with coalition methods was stark, where Iraqi doctrine emphasized mass formations, concentrated firepower, and close-range engagement. American forces had demonstrated the decisive advantage of information dominance, precision targeting, and standoff capability. The textbooks had become archaeological artifacts overnight. Lieutenant Colonel Omar Hassan, captured during the final battles for Baghdad, would later describe his psychological transformation in terms that revealed the scope of conceptual change. We had prepared to fight the last war, not this war. Our tanks were positioned to engage enemy armor at ranges of 2 to 3 kilometers. Their bombs found us from altitudes we couldn't even see. We planned for artillery duels and infantry assaults. They eliminated our positions with surgical strikes that left neighboring buildings untouched. The precision had been more devastating than any amount of conventional firepower. In the months following major combat operations, coalition intelligence teams conducted extensive interviews with captured Iraqi officers seeking to understand how traditional military thinking had adapted to precision warfare. The responses revealed a consistent pattern: initial dismissal, growing concern, sudden recognition, and finally, grudging admiration for American technological and organizational capabilities. Major Ali Mahmoud, former operations officer for the Medina Division, provided perhaps the most candid assessment. Before the war, we believed American soldiers were soft, dependent on technology, unable to fight without their gadgets. After experiencing their precision strikes, we understood that technology wasn't making them weak. It was making them invincible. A single American pilot with GPS-guided weapons could accomplish what would have required an entire Iraqi artillery battalion. The multiplication of force was beyond previous military experience, but the transformation extended beyond tactical recognition to strategic comprehension. Iraqi officers studying American operations discovered that precision weapons were just one component of an integrated system that included satellite reconnaissance, signals intelligence, electronic warfare, and real-time command coordination. The Americans hadn't simply built better bombs. They had constructed an entirely different approach to military operations. The revolution was systemic, not technological. At the Al Rashid Hotel in Baghdad's Green Zone, which had become a surreal island of air-conditioned comfort while the city outside struggled with intermittent electricity and open sewers, captured Iraqi generals participated in debriefing sessions that resembled graduate seminars more than prisoner interrogations. Coalition intelligence officers found their subjects eager to understand the methods that had defeated them so decisively. General Mahmoud al-Dulaimi, former commander of the Baghdad garrison, expressed the intellectual curiosity that characterized many senior Iraqi officers. "We want to understand how you achieved such precision, not for military advantage, the war is over, but for professional knowledge. How do you coordinate strikes from such distances? How do you eliminate individual buildings without damaging surrounding structures? These capabilities change everything we thought we knew about warfare. The questions revealed minds grappling with paradigm shift. Years later, in interviews conducted for historical research, former Iraqi officers would describe the war's psychological impact in terms that transcended military defeat. They had witnessed the emergence of a new form of warfare that made traditional concepts of defensive preparation, tactical positioning, and strategic planning obsolete. The speed and precision of American operations had compressed the normal cycle of military adaptation into intervals too brief for meaningful response. Captain Farid al-Tikrit, whose tank company had been eliminated by precision strikes in less than 10 minutes, captured the existential nature of the transformation. We spent months preparing positions, studying terrain, planning defensive fires. The Americans eliminated our entire unit with bombs dropped from altitudes we couldn't reach, using coordinates they had programmed before takeoff. This wasn't warfare as we understood it. It was execution by remote control. Remote control warfare had arrived. The cultural impact extended beyond military circles into Iraqi society itself. Citizens who had lived through the Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War, and years of international sanctions had developed psychological frameworks for understanding conflict in terms of endurance, sacrifice, and gradual attrition. The speed and decisiveness of American operations shattered these frameworks, revealing capabilities that seemed to transcend normal military limitations. In Baghdad's coffee houses and markets, conversations that had once focused on Iraqi resistance capabilities shifted to discussions of American technological superiority. The precision strikes had become objects of almost supernatural reverence, their accuracy and effect discussed in terms usually reserved for natural disasters or divine intervention. The transformation had become cultural mythology, but perhaps the most profound impact was on the generation of Iraqi officers who would later participate in their nation's reconstruction. Men like Colonel al-Rashid, who had begun the war as confident professionals and ended it as students of American military methods, would spend the following decades studying precision warfare, network-centric operations, and information dominance. Their education had been expensive but comprehensive. In 2015, at a conference on modern warfare held in Jordan, former Iraqi General Ahmed al-Tikriti delivered a presentation that captured the long-term significance of the 2003 campaign. We learned that warfare had fundamentally changed while we were preparing for the last conflict. The Americans didn't just possess superior weapons. They had developed superior methods for thinking about military problems. Their precision came not just from technology, but from systematic preparation, comprehensive intelligence, and operational concepts we hadn't imagined possible. The lesson had taken 12 years to fully comprehend. Today, military academies worldwide study the 2003 Iraq campaign as the defining example of how technological innovation can render traditional military doctrine obsolete overnight. The Iraqi officers who dismissed American gadgets had witnessed the birth of precision warfare as the dominant paradigm of modern combat. Their transformation from skeptics to students revealed a truth about military evolution. The greatest victories are won not by destroying the enemy's forces, but by making their entire approach to warfare obsolete. The GPS-guided bombs that shocked Iraqi commanders weren't just weapons. They were harbingers of a new era in which information and precision would determine military outcomes more decisively than mass and firepower. The war had ended not with surrender, but with paradigm shift. And the Iraqi officers who lived through that transformation became inadvertent witnesses to the moment when 21st century warfare announced itself to the world, one precisely placed bomb at a time.